afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Telford and Wrekin Health and Wellbeing Board. Just to remind everybody, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Telford and Wrekin Council. As always, if you would like to speak, if you could raise your hand virtually, that is. And I tend not to check the comments, so I don't know if Joseph, if you'll monitor the comments section. I would also like to welcome Dr. Julian Povey, Joint Chair, Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin Clinical Commissioning Group, as the Vice Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Thank you.
And Jill Robinson, Finance Director for Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin Sustainability and Transformation Plan, as the STP member on the board now. Okay. First item, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Shirley Reynolds and Clive Jones, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody have any declarations of interest on any of the items? I'll take your silence as a no.
Chair, I do. Just obviously with regards to the PCN, I'm a member, I'm a partner in a GP practice in Shropshire, so obviously I'm an involvement within that, and I'm a member of Shrewsbury and Action PCN.
Okay, lovely, noted that, yeah, thank you. Okay, on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a proposer and a seconder for those? Everybody happy with them?
I'll propose, Chair.
And a second. Okay, everybody happy? Yeah, thank you. Item 4, no public speakers. Joseph?
No public speakers, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, terms of reference. So to review and agree the terms of reference of the Health and Wellbeing Board. The main change is to relate to adjusting titles to reflect committee. We'd also like to thank Richard Overton, Deputy Leader Cabinet Member for Enforcement, Community Safety and Customer Services, for his time on the board. Thank you, Richard. Does everybody agree with those terms of reference?
Councillor Kelly, I think Councillor Tomlinson had a hand raised.
Okay, sorry, Karen.
Yes, Chair. I'm not quite sure on item 4, after it says varied or suspended, there's a little 1 after that, and I wasn't sure whether that was like in books where you have an addendum at the bottom and I couldn't find anything.
No,
a spell error or?
Most likely an error. No, there's no addendum attached to the terms of reference apart from the just the appendix.
So after suspended, there's a small 1. If that could perhaps be altered, I just thought it was an addendum of some sort and it was missing.
Of course.
Thank you.
Anything else? Is everybody happy? We all agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll let you know then. Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Thank you so much. Chris.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Item 6 is a COVID-19 update from Liz Noakes.
Brilliant. 1 second, Chair. I'm going to open up the presentation. Oh, no, I stand corrected. Liz has opened the presentation. My apologies.
Well, that was quick of me, wasn't it? I was not usually that slick, so thank you, Joseph, for being back up. Okay, so let's do slideshow. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can see that fine, thank you.
Fine.
Okay.
Coming up on my screen, fine. Yeah.
Thank you. So, members, I wanted to give you an update, as I've promised, on COVID, and I'll do that at every meeting. So we've had a couple of meetings of our Outbreak Engagement Board, but I wanted to share with you both some of the work that we've been doing, but also what the local position is in terms of our infection rates. So This last week, and by last week I mean 31st of August to the 6th of September, so the last whole week, we had 26 cases confirmed within the borough, and that compares with 6 the previous week. So we have had a fourfold increase in the number of cases. The cases are across the borough, with many wards affected. And only a few of the cases can be linked to situations. So for many, we can't link them to specific outbreaks or situations. And therefore, for those 2 reasons, I'm escalating the need to communicate, reiterate, and communicate with residents to follow the rules. I mean, you can see in terms of this graph how actually many areas in the West Midlands are increasing significantly, as you all understand from the national picture as well. And whilst we are lower than the West Midland and the national average, we have started from a lower base, as you can see in that graph below. So I think we need to start to prepare ourselves for some of the situations we've seen perhaps elsewhere. Okay, so this is perhaps a more simplified version. So just to confirm, though, we've had 26 cases last week. 4 weeks ago, we had 27 cases. If I remind members, I did say that many of those cases were linked to a few situations. And so the situation is different this time because I'm not linking them all together. Okay. In terms of engagement, the Health Protection Hub are extremely busy, but have spent some considerable time in terms of engaging with many high-risk settings. So in terms of the licensed trade, in terms of factories, manufacturing, universities, schools, early years settings, and many other workplaces. We've been very proactive in trying to engage all those high-risk settings in terms of advising on being COVID secure and what to do if they have a suspected or a confirmed case. So I just wanted to highlight to you how we have stepped up, we stepped up our messaging to the public. Last time we were in a similar position when we had 27 cases within the borough and an escalating number. So we will start using that help avoid a lockdown message similarly. And this is some of the material that we have used to date. In terms of communications, I've been keeping the outbreak engagement board up to date, but in terms of some of the comms material, so we have, again, as I described earlier, started to use a more harsher avoid a lockdown message where our cases start to escalate, and we will do that in a similar fashion if we escalate even further. We've produced graphics and schemes that are already being sent out to pubs and restaurants and bars in a similar way. We have engaged with the Interfaith Council and have lots of translated materials which we have delivered across the borough to partners and to premises to support the messaging. And indeed, we have undertaken many interviews and press releases. So in terms of the social media impact, so our previous, before the avoid a lockdown message, we were using Stay Safe, Be Kind campaign, and that has been, in terms of its engagement, probably more engagement in terms of some of that than some of the national messaging as we understand it. We have targeted campaign at the 18 to 30-year-olds a few weeks ago. And in terms of the newsroom, our most read items are some of the messages that we've sent through that in terms of help avoid a lockdown and in terms of the publication of the 7-day infection rates, which will take place this afternoon. And again, in terms of email updates with a wide distribution on it. Okay, so I just wanted to, at the end, just highlight a few hot topics then. So as I've said to you, there've been national, regional, and indeed local increase in cases. and the Health Protection Hub, which has been set up involving both public health staff and public protection staff, has been extremely busy this last week in terms of dealing with the confirmed cases, but also dealing with the multiple inquiries now from a whole host of different settings, including schools. We are training additional staff to be able to be part of that Health Protection Hub. With schools returning, many schools and parents have been seeking testing for coughs and cold symptoms. We have reiterated the guidance in terms of seeking a test where you have one or more of the three COVID symptoms. The week before last, we did have quite a few cases in terms of from holidaymakers returning from overseas. That seems to have reduced now, but again, we put a lot of communications out around that. We've all understood the issues around the national testing issue, which in terms of high demand on national testing and an issue with lab capacity not being able to meet that high demand. And some issues with the booking system in terms of people not being able to book at their local test centre and being sent far and wide to their next nearest test centre. Care homes, I just wanted to report that staff testing takes place now on a weekly basis and residents take place on a monthly basis. So that is testing all staff and all residents in the nursing home on a regular basis. And then lastly, I just wanted to say that we are, and we've publicised this, we are working to plan some walk-in testing sites within the borough, within some of the district centres within the borough, because we recognise that we need to make sure that everyone can have access to testing. Not everybody drives and not everybody feels comfortable enough to use the online system or ring up for a home testing kit. So walk-in testing sites, we will plan with the national testing team to have some walk-in testing sites within the borough as well. And I think that if I take that down, that's taken down, yeah? Great, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Sorry, couldn't get it to unmute. Yeah, the question I have to Ms. Notes is the new media stuff that you're sending out, is that going to be supplied to councillors so we can use our local resources to get them out locally?
Yes, I think we did that last time, Councillor Fletcher, so I'm sure we can do that again.
Thank you.
Councillor Watling.
I think Karen was before me, Kelly.
Oh, sorry. Poor Karen, sorry.
That's okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, Liz, this must be a real busy time for you, and I just want to thank all the officers that are working with you in this dreadful situation. My concern is that we don't try to go out to different places too much, but when we went to Telford yesterday, we were a bit disappointed with the number of people that weren't wearing masks in shops and actually around the centre, even though they had security guards at all the entrance and exits there. They didn't seem to be getting people to wear the masks. And also in some stores we went into, they weren't wearing masks either. So we just wondered, you know, I thought that now that, you know, that was the rules, and it's a bit worrying and disappointing that that's not happening. And I just wondered how we could engage with the centre to make sure their security guards and the shops actually adhere to this issue.
Shall I come back? We are aware of that issue and we have raised it with the shopping centre. There's been a number of inquiries about that. A number of people raised that issue. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and yeah, I want to echo Karen's thanks to the teams, Liz. I think you're doing a great job in trying to keep people informed. On testing, can I say I'm amazed at the national test and trace system. It's appalling what's happening locally. We've got situations where people are being sent to, believe it or not, sent to Manchester, Oldham and places like that, which are under lockdown at the moment. You know, I cannot see the sense in that, and I know it's nothing to do with our local arrangements, Liz, but I have to say it's a real mess at the moment in terms of you know, sort of what's happening. We hear that it's lab issues that is the problem, but I mean, I cannot understand why somebody would be sent to Oldham from Telford because of lab issues. I mean, it's and if that is the case, then there's something terribly wrong with the national system for that to actually happen. I'm really pleased that we're looking at walk-in centres. I think the point you make, Liz, is really appropriate. There's a lot of local residents who don't have the ability to drive to a centre, even to the local centre in Telford, which if they were ever sent here, that would be great. I mean, I hear people being sent from Manchester to Ironbridge to come for tests, which is quite amazing, really. But I understand that the walk-in centres will be in the local centres, which is really good, and I was pleased to see the that moving forward. But I mean, is there anything we can do? I suppose my question would be: is there anything we can do to, you know, to make sure that people know how they can best get a local test? Because you know, people will be avoiding going for tests if they're being sent to places a long way away.
Do you want me to come back on that, Claire-Lee?
Yes, please. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, so I mean, I have put out communications around making sure people go who have got one or more of those 3 classic symptoms. I am also putting out communications, and I know not terribly helpfully, but I am told that people should try again later, and they may be able to get into their local centre. So that's, you know, I am trying to communicate what I have been told to communicate. But in a sense of reiterating the guidance about who needs to be tested. I think that's what I can do at this point in time, and that's within my gift.
Thank you. Barry?
My question is about sufficiency of testing kits. We've seen that we ran out of kits.
I can't hear Barry. Can you? Can anybody hear him? Can you hear us, Barry?
Sorry, I can hear you, but can you not hear me?
Can now, yeah, you just dropped out, I think.
Yeah, it was about sufficiency of testing kits. We noticed we ran out at Diggers Bank, and there seems to be a shortage of kits nationally. If we're to have local centres, have we got sufficiency of testing kits being delivered to us?
So if I answer that, in a sense, that's what I'm referring to when I'm saying it's the lab capacity that is the limiting factor on how many appointments can be made and how many kits can be distributed. Right. So that's part of that national issue in terms of having sufficient lab capacity to meet the current demand.
Yeah, well, that answers part of the question, but if we've got all these open local things and we haven't got any kits, it's a bit selfish.
Yeah, so I mean, back to nationally, they need to increase the lab capacity to be able to service all the requirements in terms of testing.
That's the point I wanted here. Thanks.
Andy?
Yeah, just just really to sort of echo some of Paul's comments. I don't think we can understate the amount of stress that the chaotic national test and trace system is causing for our residents in Telford and Wrekin. We've got people here already under huge pressure as a result of needing to work with their children going back to school, not being able to access a test. I mean, I just anecdotally, and I know of somebody who I'm quite friendly with whose husband had to have an operation in London, was told he has to have a test first. He rang up National Test and Trace and he got 4 different answers as to what he should do in one day from the call handlers. And in the end had to go to Wolverhampton for a test. He already stressed about the operation, already stressed about whether he was going to fit this in on time. That the one effect is stress. The other effect, of course, is to undermine the messages that locally that I think we've done so well in trying to get out. People will either become more anxious, or they will just give up, depending on how they're feeling at the time. And that's exactly what we don't want if we're gonna stand any chance of getting this pending second wave, which is what it seems to be, under control. I mean, in terms of what we can do, Sean Davis, the leader, and myself have written to the Secretary of State outlining all the points of concern, and we await a response. I dare say we're not the only local authority in the country to be doing that at the moment. It is a disgrace. There's no other word for it. Our expertise and our ability to get on the front foot, as I think has been well demonstrated in this, and our teams have worked extremely well to do what they've had to do. They need to be bolstered to deal with this, rather than leaving this to the mess created by National Test and Trace. Thank you.
Ian, you've got your hand up. Was that from previously?
No, it's a further question to Ms. Noakes. You talking about local walk-in centres. I assume that these will be using existing district centres. Will there be any geographical restrictions on people attending them? Mainly because I think in Prisley we don't have a district centre. In fact, we've got nothing in Prisley. And we're going to have to go to one of the other centres. Will we be allowed to do that if we need to have a test, or will be prevented?
No, you'll be allowed to do that.
Thank you very much.
Or did you have your hand up, or is it from previous? And it. Keeping me on my toes, aren't you? Okay. Is that all the questions for Liz? Yeah. Helen. Okay, moving on to item 7, working with partners to reduce health inequalities in Telford and Wrekin. And that's Louise Mills presenting.
Hi, it's Louise and Helen Potter. So Helen, are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, will do.
Thank you.
Sorry, Helen.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Helen. So just by way of introduction, the presentation today, the short presentation, it's in 2 parts. So Helen's just going to start by presenting some data, some information, just to help you understand the picture of health inequalities across the borough. And then I'll finish with just a few slides, just talking to you about some of the work and some of the current priorities in terms of where we're focusing our attention at the moment. So over to you, Helen.
Okay, thank you. That's Okay, so I'm just going to whiz very quickly through a few slides to start to demonstrate some of the things that the data can tell us about health inequalities. I know that time is tight, so I'm just going to very quickly whiz through the slides, but happy to answer questions or share them afterwards as well. So in terms of health inequality, one of the main indicators we can use is life expectancy to just as a catch-all overarching measure of inequalities. So starting with that, what we know nationally is that life expectancy has failed to increase across the country in the since about 2010. And we see that same picture in Telford and Wrekin. So this is life expectancy for men and women since 2001. And what we can see for men in the last decade, the increase was higher than the increase in life expectancy more recently. So we can see that life expectancy has stalled for men, and then even more notably for women, you can see that life expectancy has stalled. However, if we start to look at life expectancy in more detail, what it starts to show us is even more about the inequalities across the borough that we can see by looking at life expectancy. So whereas life expectancy has stalled overall, what this chart starts to look at is life expectancy and the change since 2010-12 to the most recent data from 16-18 by the level of deprivation in the area that the person lives. So basically, if we look at the graph in a little bit more detail, on the right-hand side, that is showing the change in life expectancy in this decade for people who live in the least deprived areas of the borough. And you can see that in almost all cases, their life expectancy has increased, whereas on the left-hand side of the graph, that is the change in life expectancy since 2010-12 for people living in the most deprived areas of the borough. And as you can see, in the majority of cases, that has decreased. So this chart again is showing a similar message, but in a slightly different way, really, to show that inequalities gap in life expectancy. This is starting to look at the gap in life expectancy for men and women who live in the most and least deprived areas of the borough. So to explain a bit more, that 7.5 there is shown that in 2010-12, there was a gap of 7.5 years between life expectancy for men living in the least and the most deprived areas of the borough. And then what we see is that by 2016-18, that gap had increased from 7.5 years to 10.1 years. Similarly, for women in the borough in 2010-12, the gap in life expectancy between those living in the least and most deprived areas of the borough was 3.8 years, and that's more than doubled now to 8.7 years. We can look at this life expectancy inequality in another way by looking at what part of the borough those people live in by ward. Now, I will start by saying there is a caveat around looking at life expectancy data at such small geographies, particularly around the location of some care homes, which would be people's last residence before they pass away. So there are some caveats around it, but even so, I think it's still a really useful measure to look at in terms of the difference in life expectancy. So for example, on the right hand side of the graph, we can see that a man in Priorslee has a life expectancy on average of 87.3 years. And if we look in neighbouring St George's, it's a whole 10 years less life expectancy in neighbouring parts of the borough. Similarly, with women's life expectancy, it's the same caveats around looking at such small geographies, but at two ends of the graph, we've got Admerston and Bratton with a life expectancy of females there of over 90, and a life expectancy of women in Haygate of nearly 13 years less. So as you can see, life expectancy does start to show us quite a lot about the inequalities in the borough. And then very quickly, I've just got a couple of different data sets which also starts to show some of that inequalities and some of the inequalities that are persisting over time. So if we look at free school meals, this is another indicator that's used nationally to start to look at that inequalities gap. And so this is the level of development of children in reception, and the difference between the level of development for those claiming and not claiming free school meals. And so I guess that the key point here is that although the level of development has increased for both children claiming and not claiming free school meals, the gap has persisted throughout that time. And then finally, just to use a different data set, what we've started to look at is some of the more recent data sets and what we can see is happening more recently. And I guess what we're starting to think about here is the impact of COVID, because I'm sure you've seen nationally that there are reports by people like Public Health England where they're starting to look at the impact of COVID-19 on health inequalities. And so there's a lot we still need to understand about that data locally, and only some data sets that are available. But what this is starting to look at is the claimant count. So these are people claiming the unemployment element of universal credit, and what's happened to that recently. So the graph is showing, as I'm sure you'd, a not unexpected pattern, both in terms of the claimant count going up between March and May, and there being more people in our more deprived areas who are claiming unemployment benefits. But in terms of inequalities, the gap has increased. So, hold on, there we go. So then there are around 7% of people in our most deprived area in March 2020 who were claiming unemployment benefits, compared to 0.9% of people in our least deprived areas. And the gap between those 2 points is 6.1 percentage points. And what we see in just 2 months to May 2020 is that that gap has increased from 6.1 percentage points to 8.6 percentage points. And so, like I said, that was a very quick whiz through some slides that hopefully give a little bit of context to what we're seeing in the borough around inequality. So I will now pass over to Louise.
Thanks, Helen. So just wanted to share with you just some examples of some of the work that's underway to address the inequalities in Telford and Wrekin. So just the first slide here outlines just some of the work that's underway with our health partners. So we're currently reviewing information that's been made available from Public Health England and also from the Health Economics Foundation, just to help us better understand the impacts of COVID and what we need to do and what we need to take forward and think about in terms of our service reset and recovery plans. There's also been a refresh of the long-term plan, and that now includes some additional refocused priorities, again in response to the pandemic. What that particularly focuses on, it kind of strengthens a few key areas around data intelligence and strengthening our community engagement approach. When considering restoring NHS services, there's an enhanced focus on our performance monitoring and thinking about how we really link that to the most deprived neighbourhoods and the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, because we'll know from COVID that those particular groups are particularly vulnerable. There's an enhanced focus on digitally enabled care pathways, and it also includes a number of actions to accelerate some of our prevention programmes. So far better targeting of long-term condition prevention and management programmes, and a specific priority and focus there is obesity reduction. And as we all know, mental ill health, we have seen an increase in demand through the pandemic as in response to COVID. So again, I'm sure you can appreciate that's also a key feature. Thanks, Helen. Next slide. Helen, can you move on? For? Yeah, sorry, thank you. So then in terms of the wider work, I guess, that we're doing as a council working with partners to address inequalities, I think it's fair to say that in terms of our strategic approach, that's very much in the early stages of development still. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Sir Michael Marmot. So, 10 years ago, we had the Marmot Review, we had a Marmot report, which outlined a number of areas where we needed to focus our attention. Earlier this year, Sir Michael Marmot, working with the Health Foundation, has published his 10 years review. So it's a really interesting read, and I'll encourage you all to have a look at it. There's an executive summary, but it outlines a number of key messages in that report, all of which we know, whilst they're national messages, They are also the local message for Telford and Wrekin as a borough, and very much that's been covered by Helen's earlier slides in terms of our data set. So where we're up to now is in terms of our strategic approach locally, we're looking at identifying some of those key areas of action. So looking at some of the learning from Marmot, looking at some of the Marmot City work, and looking at what we need to do locally to improve the life opportunities of Telford and Wrekin residents. We're really keen to work with partner agencies, particularly the community and voluntary sector, around community engagement and looking at what support we can give to them to help maximise their capacity and capability to reduce health inequalities across the borough as well. Then I think we'll be at a stage where we can develop and then hopefully implement a programme. I think in terms of the work we're doing around health inequalities, it's fair to say that we've got lots of examples of best practice, lots of small pockets of best practice, but the challenge for us now locally is how can we scale that up. A big thing in terms of addressing inequalities is looking at your service offer, your support, and making sure that that service provision is available to all universally, but then thinking about how you really target that support and those resources in the areas of most need. So that's a local challenge and something we now need to start to consider. And through some of the local discussions we've been having as part of that planning and thinking about our priorities, we have opportunities to do some collaborative working with Coventry, who are one of the original Marmot cities and are one of the few areas that have actually shown a considerable improvement in outcomes and indicators linked to inequality. So that's a really exciting opportunity for us. Thanks, Helen. Next slide. I think I've just got two more. Helen? Helen? Is she there? Sorry, can you just move the next slide on? Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So then just wanted to give a couple of examples. So whilst in the absence of, I guess, an overarching strategic plan, as I said, we have got some really good examples of work. So thinking about the wider determinants, we know that child development, we know access to good education, employment, where people live, will all have a huge impact in terms of health and wellbeing and inequalities. So areas that we've started to progress is around housing, homelessness and inequalities. So a multi-agency working group has been set up, and this is very much a joint piece of work between public health and the council's housing team, where we're starting to look at homelessness, look at access to primary care, mental health and other specialist support services. So starting to have a better understanding of the wider health needs of this client group, looking at workforce training development, some of our pathways, the interagency working, and from those conversations looking at how we can make improvements to some of our service delivery. But a real focus around the housingless and homelessness agenda is very much about that access to mental health services and primary care. So we're identifying that as a particular gap that we're keen to progress and starting to progress with local partners. And then the last slide, the last example, is around the work with planning. So we know from the slide that Helen's put up about the importance about where people live. So we do have opportunities through our local plan review to really start to consider health and wellbeing issues and how can we proactively work to narrow the gap and address some of the inequality issues. So we've used some of our public health funding to part fund a post that sits within the council's planning team, just to make sure we've got dedicated time and resources to really focus on this important agenda. So through that work, what we hope to be able to do is address the role of town centres and district centres, so looking at how we can balance that need for local regeneration, but with a healthy food and social environment. Looking at how we can incorporate healthy design into developments and the use of urban greening, so kind of more trees, walking routes, access to good quality play areas. Really wanting to build on that COVID-19 effect. So we know that more people have been out walking, exploring their local areas. So again, looking at the natural environment and green space. And another key focus is around kind of that infrastructure planning with health providers and partners. So how can we kind of improve some of those links as well? So this will all be part of the local plan review, and a key output, which I think will put us in a strong place, is we're looking at producing through that work a technical paper, which will very much bring together that evidence around health and wellbeing, which can then really help us to support local decision making. So we're starting to make an informed decision around some of those planning applications to make sure that we do everything we can to improve inequalities and reduce some of the challenges that we're seeing locally. And I think, Helen, that's the last slide. So, yeah, open to questions or comments.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very useful run through, I think, from Helen and Louise. And I mean, just firstly on the national picture, we know this is not just Telford and Wrekin that are seeing this this increase in inequalities, in health inequalities. Something must have happened in 2010. I can't think for a moment what that was, but there was some change that occurred at that point. And we're reaping the consequences now, aren't we? In terms of our local response, I was really pleased that Louise was putting some meat on the bones there in terms of local actions that can be taken. But there's a long way to go on this, as I think Louise was suggesting. I mean, we've really got to be careful that it doesn't become like equal opportunities did at one stage and become something that you have to bow the head to rather than to take practical steps on. I don't really want to see it in anybody's report where it is just a token gesture without some explanation of what it actually means in practice on the ground. I think for us in Telford, Telford and Wrekin, with our focus on place and on community, we're well positioned to translate this into action on our estates and our neighbourhoods. Yeah. And I think that's where our focus has to be. And linked to that, I'll make the point which I keep making, and that is that we need, through our local partnership, through TWIP, to have the resources and the capacity to make our own decisions on how we deliver and commission those services at that place level. That's crucial to us, and I'm sure Julian and David listening will recognise where I'm coming from on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. Many years ago, when I was on a particular board, we looked at centres that we had where we were teaching people how to cook and things like that, because there's a lot of people that didn't know how to make certain foods, which obviously are very important for us to eat. So that doesn't happen anymore, which I think is quite good, because that was concentrating more on certain areas in the borough. And I do think that it did have an impact on families. The other one was when you're talking about the planning side of things and you're talking about play areas. I was actually talking to an officer earlier on about play areas, and we don't seem to have very much money to actually revamp and make these play areas safe and modernise them. Obviously, the newest housing developments have great equipment, but the older ones are falling by the wayside because as a borough we haven't got the finances to improve them with newer equipment. So if we want to encourage people not just to walk on green spaces but to walk their families down to the local park, if there isn't anything there for them to use that's good quality, then I don't think they're going to actually participate. So are we going to be able to get funding to actually upgrade some of the equipment and park areas that we have? And also think about what are the schemes that we can put in place that we had years ago. Thank you.
Come back on that.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think part of our strategic plan and our strategic approach to this is working out in terms of investment where that needs to go. So it's very much around priority setting as well, isn't it? And looking at where we need to invest our resources. So it will be almost, I guess, about where play areas in terms of investment would fall into that. What I can say is we do have dedicated teams within the council that have that area of responsibility, and I think it's fair to say they are particularly proactive at trying to source external funding as well. So we have seen a lot of improvements to outdoor space, including outdoor gym facilities as well. So I think it is something that it's fair to say it's on our radar. So I think, yeah, but I do take your point. It's really important, yeah.
Thank you. Caro?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Hello, everybody. Just wanted to note, I was very struck by what you were saying, Louise, about the links between the voluntary sector and health. Just to note that the STP is doing a piece of work, as I'm sure you know, about personalised care and community engagement. Which is very much thinking about how the VCSE can be brought into that. That reports to the Community and Place-Based Programme Board, which I believe is a joint board, Shropshire, Telford. So I'm on that group, and I'll feed back anything, as I'm sure other people around the table are. So I think we could feed in to that piece of work and back from it.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. So I'm aware of that work. I think the challenge today, Caro, in all fairness, was with such a tight sort of time scale in terms of the presentation, it's quite difficult to include lots of things. And I think what we probably need to do is maybe bring a paper back at a later date when we've maybe had some of those follow-up conversations in terms of some of the planning and how we can work with partners. Maybe bring a report to a future meeting where we can outline in a bit more detail some of the work that's taking place.
Happy to help with that if that would be useful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Caro.
Yeah, thanks, Louise and Helen. Really clear presentation on the challenges that we have in terms of health inequalities across Telford and Wrekin. I think it's always been high on our agenda. And Karen, Councillor Karen Tomlinson mentioned the Sure Start programme, I'm sure, when she was talking about some of the issues that were there. I can go back to being involved with Sure Start early on, when the OECD came and did their regular visit to Britain to look at child poverty, and had to come back again because they thought they'd made a mistake with the difference from 2000 to 2005 that had happened with child poverty. And what that was about was not just about health inequalities. It was about the whole of that social agenda, including linking tax credits to supporting families who were in low incomes. And I think what we have to think about is that child poverty issue, especially with the looming crisis we've got post-COVID in terms of employment in Telford and Wrekin. I think there's going to be an issue for the future with the and some of you may disagree with this, but the looming crisis we'll have when we leave the EU as well, that there's going to be some real problems in terms of employment for the most low paid in our town. What I would say is we need to be ready for that, and I'm glad to see we're talking about that already and talking about how we can work with partners. Our agenda since 2011 in Telford and Wrekin has been cooperative, has been about working together with partners about how we can best do that. And you know, my previous role in children's services, that's what we were trying to do. And Karen, we were trying to get those universal services that we could no longer give. We were trying to work with local trusts and local councils, local organisations to actually meet some of that universal need. It's still there. That universal need is there, and it has been missing. And I think we can see from the figures that we were given today how that's affected the health inequalities in our town. I worry very much about young people, children, young people in the town, and how we're going to meet some of those challenges in the future. It's not really a question, Louise, but more a statement.
No, thank you.
Well done. It's really good work, and I look forward to the next report.
Yeah.
Karen, is your hand up from your previous, or is it?
Sorry, yes. Yes, Councillor Watling, you are correct. It was a Sure Start, and I do think that it was very important because it not only looked at how people could learn to cook, there was other issues that were being addressed at those at those different areas within Telford and Wrekin. So I thought it was a great scheme, and you know, our wraparound care for children obviously is really important, and it's them that the future. And I do think that health issues are related a lot to how people are with obviously physical exercise, but also with what they're eating and into the buying junk food and things like that. So if you bring in children up in the correct manner, then obviously that's the future of our generation will be healthier. But we need to work on that, and I'm sure that you're right, when we come out of the pandemic, things possibly could be worse, and with coming out of the EU. So I agree with that. So again, that's not a question, sorry Louise, but but yeah, I do agree that, you know, it does need to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, item 8 is the mental health update from Steve Trenchard.
Good afternoon, members. It seems like a natural segue to be talking about the impact of adverse childhood experiences into mental health, given that probably about 85 to 90% of mental health conditions are directly related to adversity and previous experiences that people have. This is a quite a practical report in relation to what has happened directly on the patch following COVID-19. I'm going to take the report as read, but there are just a couple of highlights, I think, in here. I think one of the key things has been a real recognition of the importance of localism and the added work and contribution that the third sector can make. We know one of the challenges coming out of COVID is to not return to or reset to the old what was happening, because we know that some of our mental health services were really up for significant improvement. And one of those key areas of improvement that we want to not return to, but want to make some real difference in, is around how people access services. And I think particularly around that whole urgent and crisis care offer across all ages. We've got some significant gaps that have really become highlighted in this period. In that space, this idea of a more cohesive, holistic and socially orientated front door that provides the right sort of direction and help for people is key. So we've got agreement with partners to work in that place. Equally, during COVID, we've seen a rise in young people with complexity and complex experiences, sometimes on the edge or directly in looked after care, who have gone into crisis, and we've unfortunately ended up in our section 136 suites. So again, in terms of our offer, that's something that we really want to focus on and improve. In relation to the return to the system architecture and programme boards, we've re-established the Mental Health and Learning Disabilities and Children's Board. But in this time as well, focusing on the inequalities, we've made a fresh ambition through a revamped and strengthened Learning Disabilities and Autism System Board to really focus on improving our performance in the physical health checks for people with learning disabilities, and particularly those younger people and at that point of transition as they turn 14. And we've got a really strong sense of partnership working, I think, which feels different to previous, particularly around that ambition, and also that ambition of bringing people back who are out of area or in inappropriate placements, to get them back into much better living arrangements locally. I think the overarching response in terms of partnership working has been very positive. There's been a real sense of people, we've had weekly meetings, tactical meetings, really highlighted and focused on those that are vulnerable, either shielding or those that haven't been receiving a normal level of service. There's been I think a sense of improvement in the operational work and relationships between colleagues across MPFT and the local authority, and we don't want to lose that. as we take forward the improvements that are required. Really happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just to note as well, today is World Suicide Prevention Day, so I just thought it would be worth a mention at this point about starting them conversations. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you've mentioned that, Kelly, because Steve, I was really pleased to see that there's a post-vention post, which I know is a model used elsewhere. So I'm glad that it's, they're going to be in that position to help those who are bereaved and to align them with that prevention programme. So I'm really pleased about that. And also touching on the multi-agency working. I'm glad to see that was happening, and I'm just hoping, obviously, that as it's an invaluable service to have that partnership working, that you'll be able to continue doing that. I'm sure these situations have been, with COVID, you obviously have got a lot more people with mental health issues. I also wondered about homelessness, how we were getting on with the bids. Presumably there'll be bids to the government for any national funding. I just wondered how that was progressing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And I think that the System Suicide Prevention Group are equally delighted with the post-vention work. It's something that's been on their work programme for a couple of years, I think, now. So that's a really good investment from NHS England. I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that the homelessness is absolutely crucial. One of the systems that do really well in mental health prioritise those that are most at risk on the basis that you can't really engage with therapy or support if you haven't got the basic of needs, i.e., roof over your head. It's a priority for us. I know that colleagues are working on that to get those bids together. I think there's been some short-term help to make sure that people aren't homeless, but as we come out of the pandemic, I think there will be increasing. We know the impact of unemployment and maybe landlords that are less compassionate or caring than we'd like them to be. We're going to face a greater risk of more people becoming homeless. That's something that we collectively need to pay attention to.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, just very pleased to see, Steve, the emphasis on partnership work, and particularly, I might say, in Telford, with our experience of assisting in a small way community organisations and independent sector organisations during the course of the pandemic to provide services. That was at a pretty low level. If their capacity had been greater, they could have done even more, I believe. And I think it's a really important route in for a lot of people who may not necessarily want to go through the NHS as the front door, but just need some basic support with what they're experiencing and going through. And one of the conversations I've had is with an organisation called Zen Zone, which I'm promoting a little bit at the moment, because I know they're having some success nationally in terms of those who appreciate the opportunity to do online consultations, and with the option then of being referred on to face-to-face if that's necessary. So I think I welcome the attention anyway that's being given to that kind of partnership.
Thank you. Anybody else? I've got no more hands. Thank you, Steve. Item 9, single strategic commission update for the primary care networks, and that's with Nikki Wild.
Hello there, good afternoon. Thank you very much for asking for this report on what's happening around our primary care networks, or PCNs as they're known. You have a paper which has been presented to you, which provides a summary of what a PCN is and what the nationally commissioned areas are to be provided this year. I wanted to start by just confirming that all practices still hold their individual contracts to provide overarching services to patients, and they'll still be delivering the majority of care to patients as they always have done. It's a question that I do get asked quite a lot. So the PCNs have actually been set up to enable practices to work together as a network to address some of the areas that nationally have been identified as requiring this additional support. So the network enables the recruitment of a wider range of staff to work across a group of practices, and they have a single clinical director overseeing the implementation of the requirements. And across Telford and Shropshire, all our clinical directors are actually local GPs already in our GP practices. There were a few changes to the PCNs in Telford this year, reducing from 4 last year into 3. So 2 of the networks actually merged together. And the Appendix 1 you have of the paper actually provides you with the details of which practices are in which PCN, so that you're just aware of how the networks group geographically. You might always note from the appendix that for a variety of reasons, a few practices chose not to actively take part in the PCN this year. But I want to assure you that the patients of these practices still have access to the additional support PCNs are providing, so that they're not missing out. You may also note from that appendix that 2 of our networks are working across the CCG boundaries, with Ironbridge Medical Practice working with the South East Shropshire PCN, and the Shifnal and Priorslee practice, which is part of Shropshire CCG, has joined with TelDoc to provide PCN services. So in terms of service delivery, last year the networks concentrated on setting themselves up internally and also delivering extended hours access, and that is continuing into this year. So as well as that, PCNs are concentrating on delivering improvements around areas such as structured medication reviews, weekly care home rounds, working with a wider multidisciplinary workforce, and reviewing referrals for suspected cancers. And all this work has been delayed, and the start date is now the 1st of October due to obviously the other priorities over the previous few months. So you've also got a second appendix with the paper, and that provides a short summary of each of the areas of delivery this year. It gives you the overarching requirements, the current position, and where we're going next. It is at very high level, and the work programme is across both Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin CCGs, but I hope it provides you with enough information to understand what the intentions are, at least for this year. I've also included some document links in the paper which will take you to the more formal and detailed guidance if you so wish to go into the areas in further detail. So each of the delivery areas has a CCG lead to support the PCNs, and we are working right across the system with local authority colleagues, the care sector, other providers of community services to build a multidisciplinary approach to delivery of these services. So I think, as Steve mentioned in his presentation, this approach is building on the joint working we've seen during the management of COVID to ensure the pathways are all joining up and we're making the best of the resources we have across the patch. So as an example of this is around the social prescribing workforce, where we're working with the local authority and Mind in Telford, and the Enhanced Health in Care programme, where we are fully integrated with the care sector group at the STP. We're in the process of arranging meetings with our voluntary sector colleagues because we absolutely see the opportunities for some more closer working in that sector as we're building up the resources at PCN level. So alongside the commissioned areas, the PCNs are also asked to support other priorities, and these are the flu programme, which we're just about to come into, and also the learning disability health checks. So whilst the PCN doesn't actually deliver those, they are asked to support their individual practices to make sure that their practices are getting all the resources that they need to actually undertake the work that's needed. So I guess alongside all this work that we're asking them to do, there is also a workforce programme, which is detailed in the paper, and that is quite a challenge. So the networks have actually just last week presented to us their workforce plans, and the next phase of that is to us again to work across the system to make sure that we're pulling everything together so that we're making the most of our workforce across the county. So again, an example of that is the work that we've done with Age UK and with Mind around the care navigations and social prescribers. And we're also working with the Community Trust around the first contact physiotherapists, and we're fully linked in with the System People's Group. So as well as the service delivery, which is clearly very important, the clinical directors are also playing a key role in the development of other programmes and the wider development of the integrated care systems and programmes like the Integrated Partnership Programme. So although PCNs were introduced in 2019, it is really still early days for them in their development, and their development will slow down over the past few months due to other priorities. However, the coming months will be spent supporting our PCNs to ensure the delivery of this year's requirements and also preparing for next year when they have to deliver further services around anticipatory and personalised care, joining up with the existing work that's going on across the county, cardiovascular disease, and also tackling inequalities. And we're waiting for the detail of what the requirements are around that. So I think I'll stop there. So happy to take any questions, really.
I haven't got any hands up. Does anybody want to ask anything? Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, for your presentation, and you know, I'm very clear that we used to have things called PCTs that used to do very similar things to what the PCN's doing, but I'm happy that you've given us your report. Can I just ask a question regarding the cancer group? I've seen recently a lot of talk about people not getting the early diagnosis that they need because they haven't been able to see a doctor over the pandemic period, over the COVID-19 period, and I just wondered, you know, is that the view in terms of the PCN, and what are they going to do to actually alleviate that system? Because we know that early intervention in those cases is really important.
Absolutely. So certainly the amount of patients actually presenting now is increasing. Primary care is back up to capacity in terms of the patients coming through the door, if not over what it was pre-COVID. So we're absolutely starting to see the patients coming through. So the role of the PCNs here is to work with the system leaders, Macmillan, Cancer Research, etc., to actually make sure that the referrals that are going through, you know, are the correct referrals, and that, you know, they're up to a certain level and that they're following the correct pathways. So initially, that is what PCNs are actually asked to do, and then the findings of that will then link into the wider cancer work across the patch.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. The next item is a single strategic commissioner update on the system winter plan from Sam. Oh, sorry, just to note we needed to accept and the update and ongoing programme of work. So we all accept the last one. We're all happy?
Yes, Chair.
Getting ahead of myself. Okay. So moving on to 10, so that's Sam Tilley. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
We can.
You can, good, yes. Thank you. So I think I know we're short on time, so I'll take the paper as read. There's just a few points I think to draw out for particular note. So winter planning is not something new to our systems. It's something we go through each year, and it's a complicated and challenging process under normal circumstances. However, you'll have picked up from the paper that there's clearly a different context within which we're doing this planning this year, largely related to the COVID pandemic that we've been dealing with over the last 6 months or so. So you'll see from the paper that there's a number of particular things that we're being asked to do via NHS routes in terms of restoring services that were ceased or scaled back during that COVID response. And our winter planning this year very much is a strand within that wider piece of work around restoration through to March next year and then beyond. So not only is our winter planning within a context of some system challenges it's that we'll be well aware of, we've also got the added complexity of the restoration programme this year as well. So we are utilising some of the structures that we set up across the system, which involves both council partners to address the response to the pandemic, to assist us in our winter planning, which we are in the thick of at the moment. So we are working with our partners across the health system, as you would expect, and as I've said, the local authorities to model what we understand the situation to be over winter, and then to mitigate any gaps that we might have. So that's really the main point I wanted to raise from the report, just to be clear about the context within which we're working. The winter planning, the complexities of that are unfolding at the moment. So over the next couple of weeks, we should be firming up our arrangement, making sure that we've been through robust processes around financial scrutiny, clinical scrutiny of plans, to ensure that we can implement robust arrangements to survive the winter period. As you would imagine, the comms campaign that sits alongside this is going to be extremely important in terms of ensuring that we are informing our public and our patients about how best to use services through this period. And obviously this goes alongside the multi-agency comms that we've been carrying out during the COVID period as well. So we're starting from a good base in that regard, given that we set up a dedicated comms cell to address the multi-agency comms we needed through COVID, and we'll continue to utilise that going through winter with the range of messages that we need to get out. So I think probably I'll leave it there and go to questions.
Got any questions? Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously, you know, there will be an escalation in the flu vaccines. I just wondered, you know, will there be enough supply and demand, so to speak? Because I'm in the age bracket where we've been asked that we should have flu jabs, and I think there will be more people taking up that opportunity to have them. So it's just a concern, really.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. The flu vaccination programme has been expanded this year. We are assured by NHS England that there are stocks available to support that expansion. So we're taking them at their word. We are finalising the last pieces of our flu plan at the moment. But to all intents and purposes, clearly we have a tried and tested framework that we've used year on year. We'll be using that as the basis for our arrangements this year, and then expanding on that to include those additional cohorts that we're required to include this year. So hopefully that gives some reassurance. If we take NHS England at their word, the vaccines are available and will be supplied as we go through that programme to support the rollout.
Thank you. Andy? Are you still on mute, Andy? It's clicked back on. Still on mute. Still on mute, Andy. You clicked it off and it went back on by itself, I think.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that happens to me. Yeah, but the thing that concerns me, obviously, we've got to be aware that everything is contingent upon what happens to COVID during the winter period and beyond, in terms of how other services function. I mean, I'm just concerned that some services now, even before we go into this difficult period, are not functioning in the way that they should for local residents. I mean, I'm not just talking about cancer services, for example, although that remains a source of some concern, I think, but ordinary low-level services, phlebotomy, for example, people struggling to get a blood test, physiotherapy, where it seems very hard to get a face-to-face appointment, even though others working in close proximity, like dentists, for example, are now getting back up and running. There are different ways of working that have been beneficial as a result of the learning that's happened through the pandemic, but there are some things which don't seem to be functioning in the way they should now in terms of NHS services. I'm just concerned that in some instances, at least, there's a danger of it becoming almost an excuse for not delivering in the way that's necessary. I don't see any excuse whatsoever for specialists not being able to see patients, even with a build-up in COVID cases. I'm really concerned, and a lot of anecdotal stuff that's coming to me around these kinds of issues.
So I think just picking up on those points then, I think, yes, we have to be vigilant around the way that services are restoring to make sure that as far as we are able, we are providing the right services in the right way to our public and patients, and that's absolutely key. I mean, I think I would stress that the process of restoring services is hugely complex, and that's an understatement. I think that we have to be realistic about the way in which we're able to restore things, in that we still have to adhere to a whole different set of parameters now as we restore services that we simply were not there prior. So there's the whole situation around PPE, the cleaning of equipment, social distancing, the infection prevention control arrangements that we have to adhere to, which means that it takes a lot longer now to carry out procedures and see patients than it did previously. So whilst we are working extremely hard to restore services back to as close to the levels previously seen as possible, and we have some very stringent targets from NHS England around that, which we are rapidly working towards. We have to be realistic in our approach to this, and the way that we communicate with our patients and the public about managing their expectations, that we will not see a full return to services as they were pre-COVID, because there are steps we need to take to protect them and our staff in delivering these frontline services. I would also just reiterate that cancer services were not stopped during the COVID pandemic in recognition of the importance of maintaining those services. However, they will be subject to those caveats that I've just mentioned in continuing to deliver that face-to-face patient care. So whilst I completely share your ambition to be providing the right services to patients and to be giving patients top quality care and in a speedy way, we do have to bear these other factors in mind.
Yeah, I'll just come back on that, Sam, if I may. I mean, I'm certainly not underestimating the complexities, and I do accept that that things will be slower in order to preserve the right conditions for seeing patients and for treating patients. So I'm not silly enough to think that you can just bring things back just like that. But I do, as I say, I do have examples, for example, where people are given virtual appointments for things like physiotherapy, which clearly aren't going to do the job. Now, if the specialist's time is available, then a virtual appointment for something like that is probably not the best use of their time and isn't going to satisfy the needs of the patients. And similarly, where you've got simple things like blood tests, for example, which are causing people to hang on the phone for an hour to try and get an appointment. There is something a little awry, even given the difficulties that you described, Sam, and I don't underestimate those, believe me. But I'm just concerned that we keep our eye on some of the systems and the way they operate in these times, and that we don't allow things that needn't slip to slip.
Absolutely, I completely take that on board. I think this is an imperfect situation we find ourselves in, and we are stepping through unknown territory every day in tackling this. I think you're absolutely right. We do need to keep making sure that we reflect on the way that we are now restoring services to make sure that we're doing that appropriately. I think it's also fair to say that there's been a considerable amount of learning about how we operate services, how we interact with our patients, opportunities to do things differently. Phlebotomy is a good example that you've raised. The COVID pandemic has allowed us to reflect on the way that we've delivered some services, and is now enabling us to look at alternative ways of doing that and making improvements that we maybe wouldn't have been in a position to do previously. So we are mindful that as we move forward, as we try to do things differently and improve, we won't always get it right, and we just need to be reflecting on that, taking that learning, taking the feedback as you're giving it, and others, and factoring that into how we go forward.
And just on that, I think, especially with the health inequalities and people with mental ill health, it all links in with the fact that if you've got to sit on the telephone for an hour to get a blood test because you've got mental health medication, that will get withheld if you don't take blood tests and things like that. That sort of feeds into them health inequalities, doesn't it? Because people aren't necessarily going to have the money to stay on the phone when they're 85th in line and things, which is what within my role we've been facing. So luckily they can use my phone, but so that is an issue, isn't it, that you can't just contact your own GP to get a blood test.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the whole health inequalities agenda now, has come to the fore again, and I think a lot of us would be pleased that, whilst that's presented a number of challenges through COVID, that is now much more firmly on the agenda again, and there is an appetite certainly across the health sector and undoubtedly also within the councils to really bring health inequalities right into the centre of what we're doing. And drive that forward. So that's something I'm very keen to support.
Thank you. Barry?
My observation really is that as being the chair of Health Watch, the health services are working under tremendous pressure, and they've got so many targets that they've got to achieve. The restoration of services, system transformation programs, the meeting the needs of the CQC safeguarding issues on the recent report. I'm aware of the work that's going on, and I'm also worried with all this work that's going on, what happens if we get a serious COVID spike? We're restoring services and we're restoring staff back to their previous positions, which is part of the process. Are we ready for another spike, or will we just have to have one mad rush? Is this in the planning, Sam? Because I think that's what the people of Telford are getting a bit worried now. We're seeing the rises around the West Midlands. 57 in my sons in Corby, Wolverhampton up to 37 on the R scale. And we've heard from Liz our R scale's getting better. Are we ready with all this restoration, with all this transformation programs going on, and with all these safeguarding issues that we're looking at? Are we ready for a further COVID to reassure the people of Telford and Wrekin?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that we are most certainly ready. We were ready the first time round with no notice, so we'll certainly be ready this time. And just to go into a little bit more detail as to why I feel so sure about that, is that in managing the restoration process, we've been very clear in that process to build in scrutiny around how services that are restoring would be able to step themselves down again should that be needed, and there is a system commitment that services would be able to do that, and that staff would be redeployed as necessary. We've also built into that process very clear steps around understanding independencies in restoring provision around PPE supply, around swab testing capacity, workforce, etc. So there's been a very detailed process in terms of services coming forward for Restore that builds in the steps we would need to take to scale things back should we have a further spike. And as you will have seen from the presentation from Liz earlier, there's very detailed monitoring that is going on a daily basis around prevalence rates, so that we can be in the best position to prepare for what might come as that position evolves.
Thanks for that, Sam. That's very reassuring for the public of Telford and Wrekin.
Okay, I'm afraid I do have to go now to Chair Silver Command meeting, so if there's no further questions, permission to step out, please.
I mean, Ian's got his hand up. Can it wait in, or do you want to ask anything before you to go?
No, not really asking anything of Sam, but
Sam, sorry. Yeah.
I think we may have lost Ian there, haven't we? So maybe on that note, then it's time for me to depart.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think Ian's still frozen, sorry. So we'll go on to item 11, which is the Health Watch for Telford and Wrekin report from Paul Shirley.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I'm just going to put a survey presentation.
You're quite quiet, Paul. I don't know if you can.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Hello, is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
So I think I've got a dodgy mic, I'm afraid. So COVID survey presentation. just to say, I have got a presentation. There's a few slides that are going to be for information purposes due to the time. I thought I had a longer time period, so I'm going to skip over some of them. But they are in the report, and they're also in the presentation handouts that Joseph will forward on to you afterwards. So really what we did was Health Watch England wanted all local health watches to undertake a survey around COVID in their local area. So we actually launched our COVID survey before Health Watch England. So our survey actually ran from May to June. It was extended by a few weeks due to a number of reasons. But we had 122 people that responded to our survey. The questions were devised by ourselves using a mixture of other Health Watch's questions, but also some key ones from Health Watch England. Due to government guidance, we were unable to undertake any face-to-face engagement, which presented quite a bit of a challenge for us. Therefore, we had to use SurveyMonkey to allow people to complete our survey online. Normally what we would do is we would do a bit of a mixture of both. The survey would be online, but we would also have some paper copies, but we weren't able to do that. We did receive some comments through emails, telephone calls, and through our feedback centre. And we also received comments from other Health Watches, organisations and Health Watch colleagues. Our report has been shared amongst key contacts, including the local authority, Telford Clinical Commissioning Group, the voluntary sector, community sector organisations, and the residents of Telford and Wrekin. And our key contacts also helped to distribute our survey along with our advertising posters. So we were trying to reach as many people as we could do within the Telford and Wrekin area. So we use various means. We use a lot of social media platforms. We also put it on our website. The local press also ran a story. So we were able to get as many stories, views and experiences as possible. And a copy of our report is available on our website, which the link is on the screen. So what do we find out? We found out that 47% of people found it difficult to access a range of healthcare services. 24% delayed getting any medical help or treatment, while 89% found themselves easy to keep themselves safe and others safe. 80% of people found information advice from national organisations. So a great source of information was the local government, the main government websites, .gov.uk, and also the NHS sites as well. And also a lot of people actually obtained a lot of information through social media and through media such as press releases. We had enough, 34% of people said that they had enough support and information around mental health. And 82% of people considered it important to stay in regular contact with others. So that was really important for people to maintain that contact. And a lot of people were actually doing that digitally. So they were actually using telephones. There was a lot around WhatsApp. People were using Instagram and other digital means as well. Though there were a number of people that didn't have digital access, and that was quite prevalent in our feedback as well. So about 56% of people managed to stay in contact with other people on a daily basis, which they said was really important. And 90% of people felt that communicating with others had been beneficial to them. So what people told us, so this is actually information that people actually gave us. Suspending services have left many people without any access to appointments or treatments. So this was in relation to GP appointments, outpatient clinics, and also dental treatment. People's appointments had been cancelled were offered alternatives such as telephone consultations. However, again, as we said, that not everyone had access to digital technology. a big issue that was raised amongst a few people was that lockdown actually brought fear and anxiety for many people, and this had huge effects on people's emotional well-being and mental health, and people did struggle during the period. We also heard how people struggled obtaining support as well, so from personal assistance. People struggle to adapt to self-isolation. This placed an emotional strain on people, and people were being told to be mindful of others, but people were also unable to see their friends or loved ones. Another key area really was about communicating with others and finding out information about keeping themselves safe. People were able to access that information, though we did hear that people's experiences of that information could be contradictory. People weren't clear on what was being said, and some of it was left to interpretation. Certain groups also felt that they had not been considered and their needs not been considered, and this was particularly applicable to the elderly and vulnerable and your BAME communities as well, who found information was their needs weren't taken into consideration. In terms of GP and hospital appointments, basically people weren't kept informed about the introduction of new procedures, so people found it very confusing when they were having to contact a range of healthcare services, and found that the procedures were being changed without proper consultation or information being put out. So following the cancellations, people were offered face-to-face appointments and consultations, and we did hear a mixed response that some people found that beneficial and some didn't. Many people felt that the government had not acted quickly enough, and they should have offered guidance and information earlier. And again, this was about there was some confusion around the information that was being put out into the public domain. Many struggle to obtain necessities such as medical supplies and food and shopping. And again, when lockdown actually came out, and people saw panic buying out in the shops, and a lot of resources were actually shelves were cleared. So that placed additional strain on people who were vulnerable and needed that support. We heard how accessing dental services was very challenging. Some practices were closed or not answering the phones, and yet that was the first point of contact for people to be referred on to the urgent dental centre if they needed any follow-up treatment. We heard from a patient who needed treatment at the hospital following a referral from their dentist. They had another health condition as well, which meant that they needed treatment before their other underlying health condition got worse. This was also backed up by their GP. However, the local hospital refused to carry out any treatment, citing COVID, and basically the person would have had to be very ill to receive any treatment while in hospital. So that caused a lot of anxiety for that person and their family as well. People would have liked more support services, support from services such as general practices and mental health services. A lot of people were phoning up their general practices and not receiving information, or receptionists didn't have the right information, or it changed on sometimes on a daily basis. Every time they phoned up, there was something a bit different about what advice and information they were being given. We heard that people who were classed as vulnerable should have been identified as such much earlier, and this could have meant they were having support right from the start. We also had issues raised with us about the lack of testing among some groups, particularly some concerns about personal assistance, carrying out personal care and support to people. And also there was issues raised about how to conduct a test with a lack of clear instructions. Informal care has had issues as well. For the first couple of months, it was around PPE or personal protective equipment. and there was no clear guidance on how or where to get that PPE from. And eventually it was sorted out, but you know, from the start, people were concerned about, you know, obtaining gloves and other items as well. We heard that some people did not understand or follow lockdown guidance, and we heard a couple of cases where people had observed practice that, you know, that could and may have put people at risk. Healthcare services struggled as well. We heard with supply and demand. Feedback show that care staff, including those in the community as well, have encountered issues obtaining PPE, medication, and generally looking after patients within hospitals. Another key area was discharge from hospital as well. It was important that everybody was informed of what they expect, but however, we heard that there was breakdowns of communication between patients and family members and the hospital during the patient's journey. We're actually launching with Healthwatch Shropshire another survey focusing on discharge, and that will be coming out very shortly. So what was done well? There was some good examples where things were going well in terms of supporting local authority. Supporting the local economy. Local council support was good. The community support line, food banks, and also having receiving phone calls, you know, just for welfare checks, just to make sure people were okay. A lot of people found that of great comfort. Neighbourhood working, recruited volunteers to support people as well. That was greatly appreciated. And there was a lot of comments about how well the local authority and the voluntary sector responded to support people out in the community. There was certainly a community spirit within Telford and Wrekin, and that was mentioned a couple of times, particularly with effective communication and teamwork, and brought some positivity to the community. People were pulling together, which was really good. We heard how local churches as well offered support and assistance. There was appreciation of frontline staff. We heard how care workers are support, from prison services to Age UK was mentioned. There was quite a few people that was mentioned that deserved special praise, really, which was nice to hear and see. Digital technology has really been a real beneficial thing for people to have, and a lot more people are sort of using technology when they probably didn't do so before. We use Teams quite a lot and other things, but we must be mindful that not everybody has access to it, and you know, that is really important to remember. We also heard Public Health Telford and Wrekin provided local information around COVID, social distancing and other things, and that was really good for people to be able to access, and it was quite reliable information as well, based on what was currently available. We also asked people what could have done better. I'm not going to go through every part of this, but certainly the key things are government information or support and guidance. People need to have reliable information, which is non-contradictory, and it's very clear information. Also accessing services and support, so more support from GP and mental health services from earlier on. Track and trace, testing earlier, so just make sure that we get enough people to be tested that need to be tested using current guidance. And discharge as well, you know, making sure that the communication between hospital and care home services is much more improved. I think from our point of view, it certainly the pandemic has been experienced like no other. The increased demand on services has brought significant pressures but it could have been much worse. People have faced many challenges. Whilst only a small percentage of people have struggled within the lockdown, many others have experienced physical, mental and emotional difficulties. People appreciated the response from health and social care professionals, and this was extended to other areas as well, such as supermarket workers. We had reference to police officers and prison service staff as well. And also that the survey has helped share people's experiences from various perspectives, reflecting their views and opinions on numerous of topics, and highlighting the greatest struggles during the lockdown period. And as I said, really, we are running an additional survey which is focusing on discharge and palliative care, and we'll be circulating that within due course. And with that, is there any questions?
Thank you, Paul. Ian's got his hand up. You did have, sorry, I can't see, but...
No, it was stuck up. I've taken it down.
Yeah. I can't see anybody else, Paul. Would you be able to take that off the screen for me? Andy?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so sorry, I'm having difficulty unmuting myself here. Yeah, no, just to say, I was very pleased to see the efforts of the council and the voluntary sector appreciated in that survey. I think we have done a pretty good job of trying to keep in touch with people and to make sure they've got the support they needed during this period. So I'm sure our voluntary sector colleagues would echo that. There's been a huge amount of work gone in on the ground to support and guide people who are obviously struggling. And the survey clearly picks up the ways in which people were struggling as well. And there's, in many senses, no surprise about that. I mean, the element of mental health at a low level, I suppose, is the one that always comes through to me. How you know, people's isolation and fear of the situation has exacerbated their sense of anxiety and all that goes with that. But I mean, we can just be prepared, I think, for what we need to do to gear up again. And it is always harder to gear up again a second time, isn't it? But we do need to be ready for that. Thank you.
I think there's definitely some lessons. I think personally, our local response has been absolutely amazing. There's a lot of lessons to be learning off that report at national level. Obviously, there's always lessons, isn't there? But there's a lot of national lessons in that report, isn't there? I think it's a definite.
It is.
If you look at the things that could have been done better, and I think we'd all have to agree with that. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to echo really what Andy was saying. I'd like to thank Paul for the report. It's a very thorough report, and also the fact that you've alluded to the volunteers. We've had a great voluntary sector where I live, and it's been run extremely well. Had a lot of help from the local town council as well. Wellington Town Council helped with some finances, and the police crime commissioner with some finances for helping with PPE equipment, and also to help with some expenses, because we've done a lot of fundraising for food banks as well. We did food bank drives, not so much for fundraising, but actually we've run in the area collection for food banks because it's in demand. They want food. So again, just thank you very much for the very comprehensive report.
Barry?
Thank you.
Yeah, whilst we heard a bit of negativity in the report, it does highlight the marvellous community spirit that prevails in Telford and Wrekin throughout the pandemic. People have shown gratitude towards people working in the front line, including hospital staff, supermarket staff, local councils, and everyone else. And it highlights the effective communication that we've seen in Telford and Wrekin, which I'm quite proud of. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. So to the last item on the agenda is the adult social care update.
Thank you. It's just a brief verbal update from me today. Just further to our presentation around the Care Act flexibilities a few months ago now, just to say that these remain in place, but they have not changed our response, and all our duties continue to be met. We have shown some flexibility around the way in which we undertake those duties. We are visiting more people in person where that's safe to do so, but we're also providing online support and telephone support. Just linking back to Paul's Health Watch report, we have continued to focus our keeping in touch calls with those groups that would need that additional support, and one of those has been our direct payment recipients, which was mentioned in the report. And what we have done where those situations have presented new challenges, for example, in the report it mentioned the availability of personal assistance. We've worked with the person to look at alternative means of support. We've kept in touch with those individuals. We continue to work with partners, as is highlighted by Steve in the mental health report, around collaborating and making sure that we do stay in touch with the right people, and that we share that support out across agencies. We've worked particularly with partners to follow the updated hospital discharge guidance, which was recently updated, and we continue to contribute to the integrated discharge team, which has made a massive difference in the speedy discharge of those people with complex needs from hospital. Within the timescale required now, which is under 4 hours. Yes, we've extended that as well to support people with a learning disability across the multidisciplinary team with key NHS partners and the voluntary sector, so that we can highlight early any individuals that need additional support. And we've continued to follow government guidance regarding the support, particularly of people with a learning disability within building-based services. We've opened 2 of our day service buildings, but obviously we've had to reduce the number significantly to meet the requirements, and we've offered different types of support to those individuals and their families, and continue to stay in touch with those people so that we can respond to their needs in different ways, given that we can't always support in buildings currently. So that's just a very brief update, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Anybody got any? Don't see any hands. Oh, yeah, Karen.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Just a quick one. I know that we can't actually open up our buildings as much for the adults to come along. But coming from a background where my sister-in-law has special needs, she can't go out to her place of training. It's a training centre that she's been going since she was 19. She's 65 now. So we had her living with us for about 4 months because she was feeling quite isolated and lonely, and for her own security we had her living with us. So I just wondered how some of these adults are coping with that, because obviously that could be a mental health issue as well for people with learning difficulties that can't go to where they normally go to socialise and meet others, and for the families as well that have to look after them. I mean, you know, it is quite difficult, and it must be difficult for them, because it gives them a bit of a breathing space when they're not having to look after them. So I'm just wondering how we support the family as well as that adult that needs that care.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you raise a very important point. What we've done in Telford and Wrekin is have an individual conversation with each of the persons of people affected by the reduced operation of our building-based service, and we've looked at other ways of supporting people based on what they and their family need. So sometimes that's been going and having one-to-one support, either in their home or in the community. Sometimes for some individuals it's been virtual support online using platforms like this for some of their care and support needs. Sometimes it's been providing respite for carers in different ways, perhaps in the daytime using an individual carer, for example. So we're very much focused on what the individual person and their family needs, so that we can adapt to that.
Anybody else? No? Well, that's it. Oh, yeah, Barry.
With the emergency measures, the discharge system now takes place in the community, and the assessments are not done in the hospital before they are discharged. Can I ask Sarah how we're getting on with the assessments? Are we right up to date, and are they all done, creating a care plan for everybody once they're in the community? Because I know the discharge club's working extremely well. I'm just particularly bothered about what was a care plan before they left hospital. Are we ensuring that care plan under the legislation is still taking place?
Yeah.
I'll be in the community, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Yes, that's a good question. It's really important that we do this in a timely way, because obviously it's not just about getting out to hospital quickly. It's also about providing the right level of care and support to keep the person well and safe, but also prevent a readmission to hospital and aid their recovery overall. So yes, we have a service, we've commissioned a service that responds to individual needs post-discharge within 4 hours, so that's direct care and support. We are not behind with that. Obviously what happens is, as soon as somebody's discharged, that support, if they need it, is in place, and then the issue will be us getting back to that person and reviewing the level of care need quickly with the rest of the multidisciplinary team, the therapist, social worker and nursing and care staff. We have been doing some of those reviews virtually, and that has helped, not in terms of not visiting the person, but in terms of being able to speak to other members of the multidisciplinary team, particularly people like care providers, which are a crucial component of the support to people with complex needs leaving hospital. So that has helped us stay on top of those reablement support plans to make sure that we do keep up to date. And in fact, over the period, we've managed to keep our length of stay on reablement to what it should be, so that, and that's also to make sure the person regains their independence as quickly as possible, but also that we can free up that care and support for the next person being discharged in a timely way.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, well that's the end of the meeting. Thank you to everybody for being here and contributing. And yeah, I haven't actually got the date of the next meeting, but we'll have it. Have you got it, Joseph?
Yes, I believe it's the 3rd of December, 2 p.m. till 4 p.m.
Okay.
I'll just double check that for you. Yeah, that's correct.
That's the date of the next meeting. Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.